What's up guys, my name is Ace, and lately with Black Ops 7, anytime I've had a video talking about weapon balance, one of the most common comments I've been seeing pop up is, why haven't they nerfed the MPC yet? The MPC is so broken and overpowered, it needs to be nerfed. I keep getting destroyed by this SMG, it's a huge problem. And in today's video, I wanted to answer the question, is the MPC-25 actually overpowered? Or is there something else going on here? Because I'll tell you guys right up front, I don't think this gun is overpowered by any means, and it's not like I'm defending this because it's my baby and I use it all the time. I actually don't use it all that often. I try to use a wide variety of weapons, so I've got a decent variety of gameplay here on the channel. I just genuinely think there's something else going on here, and I wanted to back this up with some actual data to show you guys why I feel this is not an overpowered gun. And to be clear, I do think it's a very good gun. It is an upper tier SMG. I just don't think it's at the level where it would be considered overpowered, where there's like basically nothing else in the game that can keep up with it. Now, I am going to start this off with mentioning what would be obvious to a lot of you, but many people don't quite understand this. The biggest reason we suddenly started seeing the MPC-25 pop up a bunch, and many people started getting dominated by the MPC-25, basically out of nowhere, despite the fact that it hadn't seen any major buffs. Sure, they have been improving its recoil a little bit over time, and there was also a very slight range buff, but it's not like there was a buff to this that massively improved its time to kill potential. But the reason this happened almost overnight is, for competitive Call of Duty, they swapped to the MPC-25 as their primary SMG rather than the Dravik, and for a lot of people that are really into competitive Call of Duty and ranked play, they like sticking to the guns that they use while competing, even while playing in public matches. So they might be playing public matches for a warm-up before they get into ranked play, or maybe they just play for fun, and what they find to be fun is using the same guns that they would use in competitive play in public matches. And the thing about those types of players that are really into competitive play, they tend to be on the higher skill side, especially compared to the average public match player, because they're used to playing in a much more competitive environment, and they really hone their skills doing that compared to the average public match player out there. So this is basically the entire reason that the MPC-25 just started blowing up essentially overnight, despite the fact that all we really saw with it was such a minor range buff, which wouldn't explain a gun going from like maybe showing up here or there but not really used all that often to suddenly the best gun in the entire game that's completely overpowered and now suddenly needs a major nerf. And the funny thing is, before the MPC showed up in competitive play, the boogeyman guns that I would often hear about that needed a nerf apparently were the M15 and the Dravik. And once again, it was the same story there. Those were the competitive weapons, and therefore people's perception of those weapons was often skewed because they were getting destroyed by very high-skilled players that were using the competitive guns in public matches, when the reality is those guns were good, they're decent, but they weren't really standout guns by any means. And if those exact same players were using essentially any other assault rifle or SMG against you, they would be just as dominant, if not even more dominant against you. And for those of you that are maybe unfamiliar with how competitive Call of Duty works, you might be thinking, well, yeah, of course they're always going to be using the best possible guns, so if that's a competitive SMG, the reason they use it in competitive is it's the best SMG. But that's not how competitive Call of Duty works. In order to make the most balanced and competitive experience possible for Call of Duty, they often restrict a ton of things in the game to really fine-tune and make the game as competitive and balanced as possible. And a big thing they always try to aim for is balance between the primary assault rifle and the primary SMG used, so that the roles are very clearly defined and properly supported and balanced against each other in the appropriate situations. So over the years, it's almost never been the case that the guns that they use in competitive play are actually the best guns in the game. Usually they end up being guns that are pretty good, like they don't pick the worst guns in the game, but they tend to pick ones that are pretty good and very clearly defined within their specific role. And the MPC was actually the perfect candidate for that, and this is the reason they switched over to the MPC, because it is a very good gun in very close quarters situations, but then beyond that, it actually starts to struggle quite a bit compared to many of the other SMGs that are very good up close, but also very good at mid to somewhat longer ranges against assault rifles. They don't want that because it blurs those lines and those roles too much. And so let's dive into the stats. I picked a handful of other SMGs that I consider to be just as good, if not better than the MPC, depending on the situation, of course. Yes, there will be some situations where the MPC is the best gun in that particular situation, but it lacks a lot of the versatility of many of the other SMGs. And we're going to start this off with a range and time to kill comparison with these other SMGs. And as you can see here, if we're looking at just close quarters situations, the MPC-25 has a great time to kill potential for this game at 240 milliseconds. And that is the primary strength of this gun, is it is going to outgun most other guns in the game in very close quarters engagements, out to just over 10 meters. However, we've got the VST that kills faster than the MPC-25, and that's also a full auto SMG, but the MPC does beat it a little bit in the range department. However, we've also got the Razor 9mm, which has the exact same time to kill potential up close, but it beats it in the range department at a roughly 13 meter maximum damage range. Then after that, we've got the Kogat 7, which also beats it in the range department, but it has a very slightly slower time to kill. However, they're all within the same sort of time to kill window, where the difference in time to kill is rarely going to be the deciding factor in a gunfight. And then finally, I also wanted to throw the CBRS-3 in there, largely because it's a 4-shot kill SMG, just like the MPC-25, whereas all the previous ones I just looked at are 5-shot kill SMGs with much higher fire rates. And while yes, the CBRS-3 has a more noticeably slower time to kill at 260 milliseconds, it does have a noticeably better range profile, as well as some other benefits that we'll be looking at throughout this video. And so with this, just looking at these 5 SMGs, I actually made a time to kill ranking for each range window for the MPC-25. And as we can see, right up close, it's tied for number 2 in the time to kill department with the Razor 9mm, and that extends out to 8 meters. So it's not even the best gun out of those 5 in those situations. Then from 8 to just over 10 meters, it's tied for number 1. And then it immediately drops off to being among the worst of these 5 SMGs from just over 10 meters to just over 20 meters. And that is a very common range that you'll run into within the maps in this game. And then as we get out to about 23 plus meters, it now starts to climb the rankings a little bit in time to kill versus the other SMGs. But again, it's not even the best in these situations, it's just pretty good. So nothing that I'm seeing here is really indicating that the MPC is blatantly overpowered compared to these other SMGs. Is it very good? Yeah, absolutely. It's a great SMG, but I'm not seeing anything jumping out here being like, yep, that's totally broken. This needs a nerf because it's just so much better than all of these other SMGs in the game. Now, obviously, while range and time to kill are very important stats in this game, it's not everything. So let's move on to recoil. And as we can see here, the MPC-25 versus those same SMGs has the highest amount of vertical climb with its recoil, but vertical climb's not everything. It is pretty easy to compensate for a gun climbing vertically, and since it has a fairly moderate rate of fire, it doesn't climb insanely quickly, so it's fairly easy to keep that under control. But at the same time, it's pretty easy to keep the Razor, the Kogat, and the CBRS under control as well. I would say it's generally easier to keep those guns under control at range. And then there's the VST, which with its high fire rates and fairly high amount of climb, I would say that one is the hardest out of all of these to control and predict when it comes to recoil. But once again, this is an area where the MPC-25 is clearly not a standout out of even just these handful of SMGs I selected. Next, let's have a look at hipfire, which is not the most important stat by any means, but it still is a stat that helps with the power of the gun. And in this case, the MPC and the VST are actually tied for being the best out of these SMGs. And that is a nice benefit to using the MPC-25, but it's also not the type of stat that just makes this overpowered compared to the others. It's just an area where the MPC definitely excels, but so does the VST and so does the Kogat. Then we've got our mobility stats, and I've ranked these from fastest to slowest, top to bottom. And the MPC is right in the middle here for these SMGs. So it is not bad in this area. It's got pretty good mobility, but it's clearly not overpowered relative to these others. And then finally, another strength of the MPC is its handling stats, and it does have the best handling out of these SMGs. And again, this is an area where the MPC, it's great. This is awesome. It has great handling stats, but I don't consider this to be blatantly overpowered when compared to the rest. It's just a little bit better than the rest here. And those are all the primary stats covered that really dictate a gun's effectiveness. And when looking at all of those comparisons, the conclusion I draw from that is, yes, the MPC is a very solid SMG. I would argue it's probably the best 4-shot kill SMG in the game, and it has some excellent upsides to using it. In saying that though, I could say the same about several of those other SMGs, and how they're also excellent SMGs that excel in certain areas. And the biggest thing that keeps coming to my mind is there's nothing I'm seeing here about the MPC-25 that makes it blatantly overpowered relative to these other SMGs. I could use any of these 4 SMGs and find essentially the same amount of success, and suddenly switching over to the MPC-25 isn't going to immediately change how well I perform in-game relative to these others. So, is it overpowered? No, not in my opinion. I think it's overrepresented in public matches by exceptionally good players that would be dominating with any one of these SMGs, and if any one of these other SMGs were the competitive SMG, that's what they would be using, not the MPC-25. Now, is that to say that they won't nerf the MPC at some point in the future? I don't know. Maybe they will. I know sometimes they make weapon balancing adjustments just based on usage rates. And if the usage of the MPC-25 spikes too much because people are trying to emulate the guys that are dominating them with the MPC, then yeah, perhaps they do make a slight adjustment. But as far as it being objectively overpowered, based on what I've seen, I think you'd have a pretty hard time making a solid argument for that. Now, of course, these are just my opinions, and I'd love to hear what you guys think about the MPC-25 now that you've watched through this entire video and seen the stat comparison for yourself. Do you guys think the MPC-25 is overpowered or not? If you enjoyed this one, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.